What if I told you that one of America's most successful tourism models, a system that pumped billions into local economies for decades, has just collapsed, not because of hurricanes or pandemics, but because of politics? Imagine empty condos, shuttered restaurants, and airports designed for crowds that no longer arrive. This isn't a forecast. It's happening right now in Florida. Welcome back to the channel. If you want the real stories behind the headlines, the shifts in economics, politics, and global trade that others won't talk about, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what we're about to break down is more than a Florida story. It's a warning for every state in America that relies on international visitors. Let's start in Tampa, February 15, 2025. A tourism board executive makes a phone call. His voice is shaking. "We just lost the Canadians." Not some of them, not for one season, all of them. That moment was the breaking point in an unfolding crisis. 6 months of political grandstanding had just done what hurricanes, recessions, and even pandemics had never accomplished. They drove out Florida's most reliable customers. For decades, Canadian snowbirds, retirees and families escaping winter, didn't just visit Florida, they built its winter economy. They bought homes, they stayed for months, they scheduled medical care, they supported restaurants and shops, and they spent steadily through the entire off-season. But in early 2025, that cycle broke. The first warnings were subtle: canceled bookings, properties quietly listed for sale, rental agreements cut short. At first, it seemed like individual choices, but the pattern grew unmistakable. This wasn't just a pause, it was a permanent shift. Canadians weren't taking a break from Florida, they were walking away. By January, the data was flashing red. Canadian rental bookings were down sharply. Airline reservations from Toronto and Montreal into South Florida had fallen double digits. Real estate searches by Canadian buyers were weakening. Any rational government would have looked at those numbers and changed course. Instead, Florida's leaders doubled down. They treated anti-Canadian rhetoric as political strength, even as accountants were already calculating disaster. And disaster is exactly what followed. Florida's winter economy was built on one simple principle: long-term residents who spent serious money over extended stays. Canadians embodied that. They came in November, left in March, kept properties year-round, hired local contractors, and generated steady business for months. Politicians assumed that bond was unbreakable. They assumed Canadians needed Florida's weather more than Florida needed Canadian money. That assumption proved catastrophically wrong. Billions of dollars that once flowed reliably into local economies began evaporating in a matter of months. Restaurants and entertainment venues in seasonal towns lost their best customers. Entire counties saw winter employment wither. Clinics and outpatient centers that once scheduled Canadian patients for dental work, surgeries, and specialist consultations suddenly faced alarming declines. Waiting rooms that were once full were half empty, and the pain spread outward. Contractors who specialized in snowbird properties saw their businesses collapse. For decades, Canadian owners upgraded and renovated Florida homes every winter, providing steady contracts. In 2025, many of those contracts vanished. Some contractors reported losing more than half of their seasonal revenue. Airports also felt the shock. Regional hubs in Fort Lauderdale and Tampa, designed for Canadian winter surges, saw planes flying half empty. Airlines trimmed capacity between Canada and South Florida by 10 to 20%. That's not a total collapse, but for airports and airlines that banked on seasonal traffic, it was a major hit. Car rental companies also miscalculated, positioning fleets for demand that never came. Thousands of vehicles sat idle. Florida's property market, once buoyed by Canadian buyers, began showing stress. Realtors reported surging inventory in seasonal towns as Canadians listed condos and homes for sale. Condos purchased primarily for snowbird rentals became harder to unload. Prices in those areas softened, with mid-single-digit declines in some counties. Not a statewide crash, but for investors, a clear reversal of fortune. Commercial real estate wasn't spared. Strip malls and restaurants that relied on Canadian winter traffic faced empty storefronts and unpaid leases. Some businesses closed permanently, unable to survive when their peak season became their worst. And local governments, still needing to fund police, fire, and roads, were left with shrinking tax revenues. Municipal bonds still needed to be paid, but the revenue streams to service them were fading. Meanwhile, the competition wasted no time. Portugal launched campaigns aimed at Canadian retirees, pitching warm winters, English-speaking services, and access to healthcare. Mediterranean destinations highlighted their culture alongside stable climates. Mexico streamlined digital residency processes, making long-term stays easier. Caribbean nations joined forces to promote political stability and welcoming policies. Where Florida turned customers away, others opened their arms. And here's why this loss stings so badly. The math doesn't add up. A single Canadian household spent roughly $30,000 over a 6-month winter. A U.S. family on a 1-week vacation might spend $1,200. That means you'd need nearly 30 American families to replace the economic impact of one Canadian snowbird. The volume just isn't there, and domestic seasonal homeowners don't fill the gap either. They spend less, hire fewer contractors, and integrate less into local economies. Still, Florida's leadership clung to politics over economics. Press conferences celebrated America First tourism, even as unemployment crept up and local tax bases shrank. Lawmakers advanced bills targeting foreign property ownership, while bankruptcy filings increased in tourism-dependent areas. And the governor's office blamed global market forces, anything except acknowledging that hostile rhetoric and new restrictions had driven customers out. Behind the curtain, the panic looked different. Tourism board memos leaked to the press revealed desperate pleas for policy reversals. Private industry meetings featured blunt warnings about long-term consequences. But in public, officials defended the very choices accelerating the collapse. The disconnect between reality and rhetoric guaranteed dysfunction. Admitting mistakes would have validated critics. So, leaders chose short-term political survival over long-term economic health. Industry leaders quietly begged for change while publicly standing beside politicians. The result? Continued deterioration. Political necessity outweighed economic rationality, and the shift now appears permanent. Infrastructure investments made for snowbirds, expanded airports, service industries scaled for winter surges, housing built for seasonal demand, risk becoming stranded assets. Seasonal residents who have found alternatives in Portugal, Mexico, or the Caribbean won't rush back just because rhetoric softens. Trust, once broken, takes years to rebuild. Florida has also damaged its international reputation. Competitor destinations are already marketing themselves as stable alternatives, offering healthcare, friendly residency processes, and welcoming policies. They've built structural advantages that Florida can't erase quickly. The belief that Canadians needed Florida more than Florida needed Canadian money turned out to be disastrously wrong. The evidence is all around: empty condos, unemployed workers, and shrinking tax revenues. Canadians didn't vanish. They simply went elsewhere, taking their money with them, and the broader implications stretch far beyond Florida. Other U.S. states are watching this crisis. They now face a choice: repeat Florida's mistake by prioritizing political theater, or learn before it's too late. International investors are watching too, treating Florida as a case study in political risk. The message is spreading worldwide. In America, political ideology can destroy entire economic sectors overnight. Tourism boards everywhere have taken note. They're adjusting strategies, assuming ideology often outweighs economics in U.S. policymaking. Florida's collapse has opened doors for competitors worldwide while serving as a warning for every American state dependent on foreign visitors. The lesson is undeniable. Decades of trust can be destroyed in months when political theater replaces business sense. Florida chose ideology over prosperity, and ended up with neither. Where once winter wonderlands thrived, ghost towns now spread. And here's the bottom line: Florida thought it was too big to fail. But Canadians had options, and they took them. The question now is, will other states learn from Florida's catastrophe? Or are we about to see this story repeat across America? If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Because what looks like a local story today often signals the global shifts of tomorrow, and we'll be here to track them. Florida lost its snowbirds, the money followed, and the world learned a lesson. When politics trumps economics, prosperity doesn't stand a chance. So ask yourself, how long until the next domino falls?